Today I'm excited to share a powerful conversation between two brilliant legal minds from two very different parts of the world and different systems. On one side, we have Judge Bryan Ramos from the U.S., who's also the president of the National Filipino American Lawyers Association. On the other hand, we have Attorney Rami Hourani, who's also the founding partner of Hourani, Varona, Marcado law offices in the Philippines. I'm currently traveling across the U.S., so we couldn't miss this opportunity to bring these two together and bring you an awesome podcast. And this is hosted by the amazing Laki Siap, who made the entire conversation possible. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get more interesting podcasts like this about the Philippines.
Hey everybody, my name is Laki Siap. Our friend John Dang could not join us today as he is currently in the United States, but he's listening in and still facilitating part of this podcast. I'm shout out to John Dang and his amazing crew, T and Swan, for having us here. Today we're going to be we've got an amazing guest today, and we're going to be talking about the difference between the U.S. and Philippine legal systems. We have two attorneys here to help us out with that. We have Attorney Rami Hourani, who is a partner at Hourani, Varona, and Marcado Law Office, and a former law professor, as well as Judge Bryan Ramos, the president of the National Filipino American Lawyers Association and the first Filipino American judge in the state of Georgia, joining us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
So, before we get started, Rami, can you talk a little bit about your background as an attorney here in the Philippines?
So, I started practicing 6-7 years ago now, and my previous practice, or my current practice, is rather low to the ground. We handle mostly business law, we handle employment law, we handle trade law, and these are the areas in which I largely function. I also have a deep and abiding passion concerning the ease of doing business in the Philippines and what it takes to address the structural issues that prevent development in the Philippines.
And Judge?
Sure, I've been practicing about 25 years. My practice before I came on the bench is workers' compensation in Georgia. I represent Georgia's working class. Before I did that, I represented a small car company out of Detroit, Michigan called General Motors. I represented them for a little while.
Tiny.
Just a little bit. You may have heard of them. And I started my own practice 20 years ago representing the other side, the injured workers. I identified more with the injured worker more than I did with the insurance company. I like representing David more than I like representing Goliath in those situations. I got on the bench about 2 years ago, and I am the chief judge of the municipal court of the city of Brookhaven.
Awesome. And can you also tell me a little bit about more about the national, the organization?
Sure. INFALA, the National Filipino American Lawyers Association. That is the largest organization of Filipino American lawyers in the United States. We're roughly about 3,000 strong, all the way from Georgia to New York, to Chicago, to Washington State, California, Hawaii.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a lot, and managing a bunch of lawyers is always fun. Yeah, you can imagine. Yeah.
You can only see him. So this is amazing because today we have a Filipino American attorney and a Filipino attorney to really talk about the differences between the U.S. And Philippine judicial system. How different are they? Because from what I've heard, the Philippines actually gets its judicial system model out of the U.S.
So the Philippines, at least insofar as our legal structures are concerned, is really a hybrid of several legal traditions. People like to say we're both a civil and a common law system. This is as a consequence of having been a colony of Spain for over 300 years, and then shortly thereafter inheriting the American legal tradition as a consequence of the period in history we'd like to call the Commonwealth. In that way, we have features of both. Actually, our penal code had to be translated from Spanish, and many of our constitutional structures reflect the American systems, except for the fact that we don't have individual states or the notion of states' rights. We're a unitary government as opposed to the federal government in the U.S. But of course, I don't want to preempt. Maybe Judge would like to say something more about how the two systems differ.
Yeah. Well, again, the U.S. system really has their traces to the English system, as we were an English colony for many years, and I think we are the legal ancestors to the Filipinos as well. So a lot of our traditions did transfer over. Again, we also too have kind of an amalgam of some of the common law and civil, as our states also differ. Like Louisiana is a civil statutory code state, while most of the others are not. Right? So how we differ, again, it all depends on what area you're looking at. What I find fascinating with the Philippine law, especially with regards to the real estate, that it's really Spanish law that comes up in the transfer of title, the transfer of property, is vastly different than how we do it in the United States, which is really derivative of the laws from England.
Interesting. So who really controls the justice system? I mean, the U.S. has an independent judiciary, lifetime appointed federal judges, while the Philippines, the president appoints the justices with a mandatory retirement age of about 70. Like, which system prevents better political interference when it comes to court decisions?
Well, I started the last question, so maybe Judge Bryan can take this one.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, if you look at the federal system in particular, because again, the judge system really varies from state to state, but if we're really looking at the federal system, the Article 3 judges, which is enshrined in our United States Constitution, really has lifetime appointments. And the reason for that is to really insulate the judges from the political whims that are going on at the time, and really make sure that they are not influenced or dependent upon the next election, right? So they are going to be completely independent and impartial. However, that was done back in the 1800s, I believe, and the lifespan during that time was somewhere between 30 and 40 years. I don't think that the drafters of the Constitution really anticipated some of our justices to be there in their 90s or even close to their hundreds. So the issues of cognitive decline, for instance, could be an issue, as well as the health of the justice. But generally, they're there to be independent and impartial.
So, and if I can jump in,
please.
So in the Philippines, we have a mandatory retirement age of 70 for our judges, and this is largely as a consequence of the American jurists sort of giving us their American legal tradition, but with the learnings and adaptations that they would like to see for those who might inherit said legal tradition. In the context of the Philippines, though, it's sort of the jury's out, to put it mildly, concerning whether or not that still insulates our justices from political influence. What I like to always discuss, and this is something that I'll share with my classes, is this particular case in the Philippines concerning the title of the case is Braugo versus Truth Commission, and it concerns the power of a president to appoint a commission to investigate previous administrations. That particular case was ruled in favor of the previously sitting president, and it was perfectly legally sound. There was hard law that was cited. There was equal protection. There was due process considerations, and the striking down of the creation of this panel to essentially investigate corruption. But if you look at the actual voting record of that particular case, you will see that the justices, and of course, we acknowledge that case to be perfectly legally correct because that's just the way it works, right? The Supreme Court is always correct. But we do notice that the justices voted along the lines of who appointed them, right?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. And so, even if we have this system that supposedly insulates our justices from this political influence, you still do see on the margins this tendency to vote towards political lines. So I'm not sure, the way the question is put is that this is somehow a solution, that, there's an age that they should retire at, and that should sort of insulate the court from these considerations. But, it's not necessarily the case. Yeah.
And so after age 70, with this mandatory retirement, usually the president then would have the ability to just select his own his own justices. Right?
Yes, it's not that they stop being important lawyers. If I can talk about particular justices like Justice Carpio in the Philippines, he's very important concerning our territorial integrity. He's advocating on behalf of issues like the West Philippine Sea, which, if you're familiar with that terminology, concerns the territorial dispute that the Philippines has with China. But they do stop being justices. Justice Bersamin, who was the chairman of my bar examination, is now currently the executive secretary. But yes, the president does have the ability to appoint justices after that mandatory retirement age.
Yeah, that's really amazing how your justices become advocates after their term. I mean, I'm not sure that's really that popular, or as if even, I'm sure it's happened with the U.S. system, but again, with the life system, they never have that opportunity to actually practice again. So that I'd imagine how interesting that would be from the bench, looking out as a former justice arguing a case before you.
Well, no, they don't argue before the courts, for example, because I think even they understand that there would be like an issue of propriety there. But they do nonetheless remain important. That's the only thing.
Oh, they don't practice. They're just influential in some sense.
They may practice, but they're influential in some sense. Yeah. That's largely where they're.
Do they have the ability to practice?
Theoretically, no, but
okay.
I mean, theoretically, yes, they do have the ability to practice, but if I was a judge and I saw a retired justice in front of me in my courtroom, I would have a hard time being impartial in that instance.
Because that happens in the state system. A former state Supreme Court judge, retires off the bench and starts, a civil practice or a criminal practice, and is actually in the trial courts as a lawyer. So I always found that fascinating. So I didn't know if that's the same in the Philippines as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I find fascinating as well is that actually, in the U.S., I'm starting to see a lot of similarities between the Philippines and the United States. I mean, you have, high-profile figures like President Donald Trump face multiple indictments, yet still run for office. I always used to think, hey, that's only something that you would see here in the Philippines. Yet, many believe that only the powerful can manipulate the system. How do both systems treat the wealthy versus ordinary citizens?
Well, as a lawyer, we are officers of the court, but we make our living based on the professional fees we can collect from our clients. And so if you are a private lawyer and you're being paid by a client, that's a different degree of responsibility than perhaps a public defender or someone who's engaged more generally. I'll give you an anecdote. When I was in the Sandigan Bayan, which is the anti-graft and corrupt practices court in the Philippines, there was, of course, the accused in that particular case are defended by private lawyers. And you see the difference in the level of diligence that is brought in the trial practice. I think I counted in about 1 or 2 minutes during the presentation of a witness for the purposes of authentication of certain documents, 1 or 2 minutes, 15 to 20 objections. Right?
Yeah.
So, to a certain extent, yes, because you can afford to pay for the minds of these brilliant lawyers for the purposes of marshaling an airtight, or at least as airtight as possible, legal defense. So, in that way, it is skewed in favor of those who have resources. Nonetheless, judges, justices, they know that this is the case, and they know that a particular case or a particular cause of action should be decided on the merits. So whatever procedural puffery that a lawyer is able to manufacture is balanced against the impulse to right and justice of the judge. And so, yes, it matters. So short answer to your question, yes, it matters. However, we do have a functioning judicial system, at least insofar as, like ordinary people having a case, bringing it before the courts and seeking justice. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess the question is there a two-tiered system, right? Is there one for the rich, one for the poor? And what Rami said is, yes, if you have resources, you could hire a high-priced lawyer, a high-powered lawyer, and present your case, as opposed to the indigent who needs to get a court-appointed lawyer, and they have a public defender representing them. Completely different skill set, completely different presentation before the judge. So in theory, yes, it should be the same. In practicality, it probably is not the same at all.
Is the U.S. effective at sheltering judges from corruption?
Sheltering? In what way?
More of protecting these judges, or protecting the public against these judges. Here in the Philippines, as you know, there's always talk about judges being bought.
Yes, yeah. There is a code of ethics. There is a judicial qualifying committee that does a lot of that policing, and we are a self-policing organization. In my courtroom, there's really a law, or I guess some advice that I put for my entire court is not only does it have to be right, but it has to look right as well. So you have two courts. You have the court of law and the court of public perception. So I make sure that we are a little zealous with how we present ourselves and make sure that we are completely impartial and independent from all the other things that's going on.
If I can just supply a really concrete example. When it comes to judges in the Philippines, most of the ones that I've interacted with are upstanding people, but we do have some cases where judges are nonetheless disciplined. I won't go into any of the specifics of those particular cases for obvious reasons because I'm duty bound to respect the bench.
And we haven't had enough to drink yet?
99.9999% of the time, judges, when they're doing something, they're acting in the best interest of the law and legal concerns. I will say, though, that that's a very broad margin of appreciation that we can use to approach this issue. I'll give you an example. When I was taking a pro bono case, I was defending someone who was essentially being pushed out of his land for no particular reason, where he lived with his family and his children. And I took the case pro bono because this person had been known to me for some time. I filed an answer to the complaint that was filed in court. And I showed up to court for the pretrial hearing, and my answer was not on the record. I'd mailed it, I'd emailed it. So I'd emailed it, which was sort of my saving grace in that instance. I was able to show the judge that I emailed it. I had the registry receipt from the post office to show that I'd actually mailed it. And the judge sort of chastised me, didn't understand immediately that I'd actually filed my answer within the periods required under the law. And we couldn't figure out why my responsive pleading was not on the record. Of course, out of deference to the obligation I owe my client, I did a little investigation to find out who exactly it was who received my responsive pleading, essentially, which sets out the defenses of my client. And it was one of the court staff. Like, it was, we had on record that his signature was having received the responsive pleading. And I'm not imputing any malice, but you can ask questions. Why was it that if one of the court staff received the documents, why did it not eventually find its way into the record? I, in that instance, think that perhaps something may have had some degree of misfeasance had to do with it.
Yeah.
But you just have to be mindful, right? And that probably didn't involve the judge at all.
Yeah.
Right. We have stories all the time in the Philippines where the judges are perfectly wonderful people, but sometimes their staff are doing things. One of the stories that my professors in law school would tell me is, the judge is issuing a perfectly legal and correct opinion, and he gives it to his staff, please send this out. And the staff, what they'll do is they'll call up the litigants and go, by the way, the judgment is ready, right? Without any intervention from the judge.
Wow.
Right? So that's when I say that there's a margin of appreciation for these kinds of issues.
Yeah.
A lot of the times the judges are perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Right? But there are actors in that space who have that wriggle room to conduct some chicanery.
Yeah. No, because I've always heard about a lot of bad actors in this legal system. I mean, you always hear about lawyers getting death threats, but even judges as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The Philippines, unfortunately, we have the dubious honor of being one of the countries with the highest incidences of death or serious injury for politicians, lawyers, and journalists, right? And that's, I think to a certain extent that can be explained because of the nature with which the legal system intersects with our culture. We have a very Western tradition, but we have a very, very Eastern spirit, right? And so maybe the society at large doesn't necessarily gel the best with this sort of being dictated to by a judge in his robe and maybe some other legal tradition. This is hypothetical, of course.
Yeah.
But there is room for some adaptation that can occur on both sides to help match each other's sensibilities better. Yeah.
Well, Rami, there's no jury system in the Philippines. Is that correct?
No, there's not.
So really, the judge is the trier of fact and the ruler of law. Is that right? So
Yeah.
all the responsibility, all the blame can be laid on the shoulders of the judge. So there's a clear, particular, person that's responsible for whatever is going on.
Yes, subject of course to the right of appeals.
Right.
That's the other constraint, right? And so this is where I say there's a margin of appreciation. And please feel free to butt in at any point.
Thank you.
Courts in the Philippines are stacked. It's not uncommon to find courts where 1,000 cases are pending. I show up to court and 40 cases are being called in the morning, and then another 40 cases will be called in the afternoon.
Wow.
All right. So we like, at least the popular notion is to impute these to misfeasance or other vices of, let's say, ethical concerns, right? But a lot of the times, these people are honestly overwhelmed, and they need help. They need more resources being put in that particular direction.
Rami, is there a shortage of judges? Is that the problem? I mean, it sounds like a quick solution would be let's just appoint and create twice as many judges.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say, or is it just a systematic problem as well?
I would say that there are like multiple dimensions, right? Yes, on one level, definitely there could be more judges, in which case that would help with the speed at which cases would terminate in the Philippines. There are also procedural sort of hurdles. The way that we've conceived our system in the Philippines makes it so that cases can sort of drag on. The 2019 amendments to the Rules of Civil Procedure in the Philippines have changed many of those things. So now, if you bring a case in the Philippines, you have to come with all of your evidence. You can't just sort of leave it to the presentation of witnesses and go, no, I'll present or I'll make available the testimony of my witness at a later date. No, you have to have an affidavit with what the witness intends to say, right, and intends to affirm on the stand, and then that is when and you cannot submit it subsequently, theoretically.
Is this at trial, or is this at the filing of the complaint?
At the filing of the complaint.
Holy smokes!
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy. Okay.
So that's a reform that we've sort of undertaken. Just to summarize, there are levels, and thankfully the Supreme Court has sort of approached it with judiciousness,
As they should.
as they should, and approached it on those different levels. And we're making progress in that regard, and I'm excited to see what future innovations in the legal field can occur. I'll talk about these later, and then like arbitration or alternative dispute resolution modes.
Yeah.
But we are making steps in that direction. We could still be doing more, though.
But I'm always curious to know, because everybody says there's this backlog. I mean, it's not uncommon to see cases that have gone for 20, 30, 40, 50 years without being resolved here in the Philippines. Do Filipinos even trust the legal system here?
I think you could just as easily put a question to Judge Bryan about like the level of trust that exists in U.S. judges. I think to a certain extent there is trust, right? Otherwise, lawyers in the Philippines would not occupy the privileged position that they do occupy, because there's an understanding that there is a justice system. It does operate. There are things that are wrong with it. And there is also that very deep understanding that cases that do get filed here tend to drag on for a very long time. Nonetheless, I do think most litigants respect the outcomes of the cases that are filed when they get them.
Rami, is this this backlog, is this criminal or is it civil?
It's both.
Both.
Yeah.
So you could have someone detained for a decade before they are seen or their case be heard?
Pre-trial detention is a problem, right? So it is possible actually to get to the point where you're detained so long that the penalty you would have received is lower than the amount of time that you've been spending in pre-trial detention. Wow. It is possible. Yeah. It is not a major feature, I would say, but it does happen. again, that's just sort of a lack of resources that's being put at the disposal of the justice system. We should be able to terminate cases. There are steps that the courts take to be able to remedy this. If you're a civil lawyer who is conducting trial, you will be heard last because criminal cases take precedence.
As they should, because you're taking someone's liberty.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but now, in the United States, there is, in the Constitution, there's a right to a speedy trial. Mm-hmm. Okay. Does that exist in the Philippines as well?
Yes.
And how is that implemented then? I mean, a speeding trial does not sound like decades long to me. So, I mean, I think that's the opposite of a speedy trial. So if there is a law that mandates a speedy trial, how is that not implemented or executed in the system that we have now in the Philippines?
And actually, you need to talk to a judge about how the system is implemented. But now judges are monitoring. So if you look at a case in the Philippines, you will see on the caption of the case, at least in any court documents that you receive, orders, etc., there will be an average amount of time that the case has been pending, right? And I don't actually have visibility over the circulars that the judges are following when they implement this in the documents that they issue, but I think that is largely a response, or largely an acknowledgement of the length of time that cases tend to take in the Philippines, and pushing judges to lower the average amount of time that any particular case is pending. So if a judge, say for example, receives a case from another court for whatever reason, perhaps that judge retired, and that case is pending for a really long time, you will see the urgency in the judge that you have to conclude cases as quickly as possible.
Right. You also said that the civil is taken secondary. Is that correct? So if there's like a business dispute, and it takes a second chair to the criminal dispute as well. So if I have a contract, a dispute action in a business, then I may not be heard for 20 years.
Well, it depends, right? So this is where the diligence of the lawyers comes in. If you're prepared for the incidents of trial, you're able to discard issues really quickly that may not be relevant to the eventual outcome of the case. A diligent lawyer can do a lot to speed up with the conduct of trial. If your lawyer shows up, he's not necessarily ready, he's not necessarily familiar with all the facts, that can be a contributory factor. The structure of the justice system can delay, but generally your civil litigator is capable of sort of pushing through, smoothing over the kinks in the process, including things in his pleading that would otherwise he would have to submit at a later date. These are ways that you can sort of accelerate the pace of trial. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm sorry, Lockie.
No, please. Please ask away. This is really more of a conversation.
It's completely different than how we do it in the United States. I mean, there is, the due process is that there's a complaint, and there's an answer, there's discovery, there's a lot of different things. And yes, it does take some time, but decades is not, unless it's like a big Enron case or a big complicated tax case or something along those lines. But if it's just a general, case, a dispute in contract, criminal, generally, again, unless it's like really involved or it's completely complicated, again, it's usually, and in my courtroom, we're resolving cases within 6 months, right? And that's a long case, but, if it's going to be 5, 10, 15 years, and that's the average, then that's difficult for me to wrap my brain around.
Let me give it some specificity then, so that we sort of understand the specificities and the nuance around the statement, like cases can drag on for 10 years. I think if you file a case today, we're going to be well within 5 years. Because just the new rules operate in a certain way. You're actually prohibited from filing many kinds of motions. You have to proceed to trial.
That's minimum 5 years, or you'd say around.
You can terminate cases within 5 years. That's what I'm saying, right?
Do you fear that the litigants may be dead by the time it gets tried? I mean, it's not even it's tried. It's heard even.
So this is my experience. Okay, yeah. I'm a rather young lawyer. I hope it's apparent in my presentation. But cases in the Philippines, if they concern land or highly technical matters, those are the ones that tend to drag on.
Sure.
Right? These are the ones where there's lots of considerations as to who said what and when, what documents were executed 20 years ago, right? Because that's the nature of land ownership. The stability with which you own a particular plot of land or a highly technical legal dispute where there is the opinion of experts and that these experts have to be presented in order to sort of establish the requisites of your case, and those experts have to be subject to extensive cross-examination to verify the length and breadth of their expertise. Those are the kinds of cases that tend to drag on under the old rules. And the 2019 rules of civil procedure have done a lot to ameliorate the factors that have been used to sort of drag on cases. And we've also adopted alternative dispute resolution modalities. So mediation is now part of the bringing of a case in the Philippines. Arbitration is a choice. And just to go to the meat of the matter, if you bring a business dispute, which was, I think, sort of
sure.
where we began with, judges will tell you there are things that I prioritize, right, in this courtroom.
Yeah.
They will tell you on the record, right? I have criminal cases to try because this is a court of general jurisdiction. The structure of we can talk about the structure of the jurisdiction of the different levels of court in the Philippines later. But they will tell you, is it possible to compromise? Because this court is not exactly equipped to handle highly technical commercial disputes as to analyze your invoices, the various commercial documents that you created. That is a draw on my court's time. I am handling very visceral considerations. Could you please consider negotiation?
Sure.
Right? And so that's sort of where we are.
Yeah. Which is great, and that's pretty effective. Yes?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I guess my concern, again, from a skeptical kind of person, is let's say that you do enter into a mediation, you do come to an agreement, and the other side does not abide to that agreement. Then what do? You're back in the square one, right? I mean, or in arbitration, which generally, for our audience it's another type of tribunal where you agree that there's going to be another judge. We're going to agree to the rules, and we're going to try that case before that other judge, right? Private judge, with some sort of subject matter knowledge, and then that arbitrator renders an opinion, and then one of the litigants says, "I'm not going to follow it." Mm-hmm. Then what do you do with that situation?
Well, so we have to distinguish between the kinds and areas in which compromises are concluded. If you compromise after having filed a case, generally you're going to have a compromise that is confirmed by the court. And so that is a judgment which has the force and effect of a judge. That is a compromise that has the force and effect of a judgment. And so if you do not comply with the terms of that judgment, your lawyer has to be ready to invoke the remedies that are found in the rules of court. So these are the rule on contempt, ready to of course also reference the rule on execution, which is Rule 39, I believe, and sort of go through those motions. Yeah. Right.
So really, it has to be a court-ordered mediation then that has the same leverage as a court would. Is that correct? So once you get into an agreement, that agreement is actually approved by the judge or the court, and then that is a judgment at that point in time.
Yes.
Okay. Because in the States, again, another difference is you can do it privately. We agree in this, this is what we're going to agree on. Here are our terms. We disagree, and then we do all the other stuff we need to do. But I guess what you're saying is it's another layer of enforcement, which would be the court. The arm of the court would be involved.
Well, we also do have like these sort of compulsory mediation mechanisms. If you wanted to talk about this, we should next time we can invite like the Office of Alternative Dispute Resolution. They're this amazing government office which is sort of leading the initiatives with regard to these reforms. Yeah. And they have binding mediations. They have binding arbitrations. Okay. And unfortunately, it's not so much in the mind of litigants as that these options even exist. Yeah. And so I think what we can do, at least insofar as these civil, commercial matters, these are properly the interests of rich people. Yeah. So you can understand why perhaps they have not had the most time in the spotlight insofar as the justice system is concerned, is because resolving the issues of rich people is not exactly the top of the list of priorities, but they are an important feature of the justice system because they make it possible for ease of doing business to be a feature of the way the Philippines does business, a feature of the way investments can come into the country.
Would that apply to land disputes as well?
You could technically enter into mediation or arbitration, but these are consensual modes of dispute resolution, which means the adverse party has to agree that the use of these modes,
Alternative dispute resolution tactics.
are agreeable to them.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you have the court arm for the enforcement. So once you come up to an agreement, then they really can't back out.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Even if they go into, let's say, an appeal process.
Well, there is no appeal for arbitration.
Because you agree to the terms, or else you wouldn't have,
Yeah.
the resolution. So I mean, if you don't agree, then you still have the option of where you were in the court system.
And Judge Bryan, maybe if I can ask, the U.S. Justice system is an incredibly, it's looked to as sort of the standard when it comes to legal systems around the world, and sort of the benchmark that every other legal system may judge itself by. I'm trying to be careful with the words I use. Was it always the case? I mean, when you were coming up as a young lawyer in the Philippines, were there not issues that you...
Oh, in the U.S.
In the U.S. That you dealt with when you were practicing?
Well, ADR, alternative dispute resolution, was always encouraged. Because of the same thing, because you want to alleviate the stress on the court docket. So you always had that opportunity, and obviously, when you have both parties agreeing to terms, then it's usually a lot better received as opposed to a judge ordering you to whatever he finds. So you have more of a stake in the matter, and you know exactly what you're going to agree to, what the enforcement is going to look like, and then you're done with the case, right? As opposed to leaving it up to some judge who really knows nothing about the facts and can just issue up an order and then completely miss the mark, right? Yeah. So there's no issues for appeal. It's all an agreement that we all agreed to. So that's very helpful, and that's grown since I started practicing back in the year 2000. I know it's a long time. It's 25 years into it, but it has grown quite a bit to the fact that I'm also a mediator. I mediate workers' compensation cases in Georgia, and we do that for reasons because now the litigants have an actual say in how it's going to be resolved, as opposed to just leaving it up to a judge to be like, here's what I think, like it or not, right? So.
Yeah. I want to touch on one more topic about the real estate, and then we'll switch over. We've heard of cases here in the Philippines where mega corporations can take over somebody's land rights and even building on top of someone's land and just forcing the issues through court. And sometimes these are people who don't have the necessary means to be able to fight back, and these can drag on for decades. Have you seen any resolution to really help those people who don't have those financial means?
Well, I think when answering the question, we sort of have to acknowledge the context. In the Philippines, there's Presidential Decree 1529, which is a land registration decree. This is implements the Torrens title system, which governs the issuance of titles and regulates the use of titles by owners of land in the Philippines. And it's, to put it mildly, it's archaic, right? In order to transact upon land in the Philippines, there's a central repository. You can have documents of title which may not be registered. These documents of title can conflict with other documents of title that other people have. And so whenever I approach a land dispute, sometimes a lawyer in the US will consult me about some inheritance that their client has in the Philippines. And they never believe me when I say it's always more difficult and always more complex than you think it is. Because at least when I talk to an American jurist, it's like, no, there's a title, there's a document, a title. I ask them a simple question: is it a title or is it a tax declaration?
Yeah, because those are two very separate things that a lot of people here in the Philippines kind of also just say, oh, I've got a tax declaration, I own this land.
Yeah, but what is the document from which that tax declaration springs? Is it a deed of sale that was notarized by someone who did not have the authority to notarize documents? Right? Was it perhaps the product of forgery? You may have, let's say, for example, you did actually have a properly notarized document transacting upon that particular piece of land, but it is known to the owner of that particular piece of land that his claim overlaps with another claim. All right, and he didn't make that known to the lawyer at the time bringing a particular suit. It's always more complex. But at least insofar as your question, which is a little bit loaded. It's large corporations bringing cases concerning land in the Philippines, and then sort of through sheer force of economic resource and ability, taking over plots of land in the Philippines. I would say it's actually the reverse. I think even these large corporations, with all the resources that they have at their disposal, can struggle against this archaic system, right? There's a few condominiums in Manila, and this is Manila, right? This is the capital of the country, where they're not able to give you the condominium certificate of title because of issues concerning the mother title. Like, they're not able to subdivide, they're not able to give you the proof of your ownership.
Yet they're legally able to sell these units?
I won't go into the details of why.
Okay.
It may get to that point. But yes, there are sometimes issues, even at that level, right?
Yeah, well, see, my concern with that question is, say a big corporation comes in and takes over your land, your home, and starts building on your home, kicks you out and starts building on your home. Is there like an injunction process so they can file with the court and say, hey, stop building on my home, you're trespassing or whatever it is? Or do you have to just go through that 5-10 year process to be, in the system while a skyscraper is placed on your property?
Well, so the rules of court do provide for injunctions.
Yeah.
So,
Well, how likely is that granted at that point? How soon can the judge see that before the skyscraper comes up?
well, so you're testing my recollection a little bit, but I think Rule 52 of the rules of court says that these kinds of cases, especially if you file for emergency TRO, you have to have it heard in 3 days.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you file the application, say Friday afternoon, it takes them some time to docket it. Technically, the judge has to hear it on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So, so it is possible to get these sort of injunctive reliefs, and
Assuming they have the resources to do that.
Yeah.
it does you again, right? So there's this sort of interplay. So you, as a lawyer, now have to contend with the 2019 Rules of Civil Procedure, which require you to have all your evidence sort of marshaled in advance. So if you want to do case buildup, which usually takes place over like some considerable amount of time to interview witnesses, and then you want to get an injunction, which can be issued in 3 days theoretically, right? Not an injunction, sorry, a temporary restraining order, which is different from an injunction. Then you have to balance that. You have to be able to marshal the evidence and file it promptly enough that the judge has a reasonable period within which to act. So to your question, right, I would question, to the question which you put, which is like someone's having their land or home being taken away where they actually live and reside in, I would question how that's able to occur in the first place, right? You can't just move into someone's home while they're still there. They have to be somewhere else. So if you are in actual possession of the property, you can fear this less. Just because actual possession is very much respected in the Philippines, you have the there's action interdictal, which are the summary actions which you can use to sort of remedy any abrupt loss in ownership. This hypothetical example of someone coming in and taking your house out from underneath you, I haven't quite seen it yet.
I've seen a lot of cases where, me being Filipino American, right, and I hear this within the Filipino American community that, the family owns the land, but let's say they leave, a lot of them have left during, let's say, the martial law era during the 70s, but that land has been in their family for generations. They leave and then they come back decades later only to find somebody else owning the property.
It's been adversely possessed, right? And then now it's someone else's property, essentially.
It's very common, I'd say, within the Filipino American community.
Well, principally in the Philippines, possession is the way that you maintain your rights over a particular property. So if, say, for example, you are absent from the Philippines for a period of like 10, 20 years, are you paying the real property taxes, right? So these are the questions I would ask for someone who comes to me with this hypothetical question. Have you been maintaining the property? Have you hired a caretaker to actually sit the property, make sure that nobody else encroaches onto the property? These are the basic steps. One of the things that my law professors in law school would say is, have you built a wall around the property? Because if you haven't done those things, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Yes, the legal system is there. Yes, you should be able to rely on the legal system. But the fact that the legal system exists is not an excuse to reduce your level of diligence in maintenance.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's also in the U.S., Lockie. I mean, there's a doctrine of adverse possession where, again, it's different in each state, but, if you're there for, let's say, 7 years and you own it open and notoriously and you make it out, hey, I do own this property, then, as a matter of law, that title will transfer to the occupier of that law if you're not careful.
So does that apply as well to the squatters, right? Where you're seeing a lot of people just take over somebody's land, or sometimes even if there is, let's say it's fenced up, but the owners are not physically present there for years, and they see that it is vacant. They start to build on it, and then years later they come back and find, oh my gosh, there's buildings in my property. There are
my ancestral home.
Yeah, there are people living in my ancestral home.
Well, again, right? So there's all sorts of these subtle legal distinctions at play. So let's say, for example, the property is titled, you've been maintaining it, you would be entitled to relief if you eventually brought a case to have these people removed.
Yeah, but there's a level of responsibility on the quote landowner.
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Yeah. So if you just leave it, again, the issue with 'cause I get this a lot of questions in the Filipino American community is, I inherited this land,
Yeah.
and I just assumed that while my parents were alive, it was being maintained. I'm not sure if there's a wall around it, but everything was taken care of. But they're busy in the U.S. or doing whatever they're doing in the U.S. And then when they pass away, the parents pass away, they understand that it's been bequeathed to the Philam.
Yeah.
And they go back to see, what exactly land is there, and it's been occupied for 20 years by somebody else, and that's an issue.
But a lot of the times when you approach these people who are, as you put it, squatters, I wouldn't necessarily use that word.
Sorry. There's a informal settlers.
Informal settlers.
Yes. Sorry.
All right. Who are sitting on the property. The advice I dispense in many instances when I'm talking to people from the U.S. is really, have you considered selling the land to those people, right? And then whatever areas of the land that are not occupied. Right, because these people, you're living the American dream in the U.S. You're paying down a mortgage. You have a car payment. Like you're not going to come to the Philippines and then live on this remote farmland, right? Like,
well, what's the likelihood of them having any kind of resources to actually
to even
buy that?
hire an attorney or buy the property, right?
Well, there are many ways to slice it. What if, say, for example, you talk to them, you tell them, hey, I'm from America, I know all these people, I'm going to meet people who might be potentially interested in buying this land. Whatever areas that correspond to the areas of your possession, I'm willing to pay you this share, right? So just sort of creative solutions, because, right, a lot of the times as Filipino Americans, they're quite happy in the States. Yeah. Right, and so we're just talking about how to get a just resolution that respects the property, respects the rights of these informal settlers, and then also vindicates the rights of the actual owners of the property. And these solutions, they're not always palatable. It's always tempting to go, no, I want the property. I will expend the resources to go to court and then bring it back. That may not always be the most expedient option.
Right? Yeah.
Well, a lot of times it's emotional anyway, because a lot of times those informal settlers are relatives of yours, because they know what's going on and they actually have occupied that land now, and they're in the States, they're never going to come back, and they take that gamble until you actually come in and you realize what's going on.
What rights do these informal settlers have?
Well, it depends, right? It depends. So if, say, for example,
such a lawyer answer. It depends. It's very fact sensitive.
Because very, very often these informal settlers are holding something, right? They're not just, a lot of the times, they're not just saying, oh, you're not going to approach them and go, I'm an informal settler and I'm holding this illegally. Very few people have the sensitization to legal issues and legal matters to be able to respond in that matter.
Yeah.
So they often have something, right? Like it can be a deed of varying degrees of legal enforceability. but they will have something, and this something is called a just title. There's different classifications, right?
The informal settlers will have just title?
I'd have to crack open a book to find it, but there are degrees of title that you have.
Of land ownership?
Yeah.
Of land ownership.
Okay.
And that which I mentioned is the basis of prescription. It's the basis of acquisitive prescription tolling as against the ultimate landowner. And so, yes, I know it's a very unsatisfactory answer. It really does depend. And you need a good lawyer to advise you as to the extent and scope of your rights and the options you should be looking at.
And Rami, this is all derivative of Spanish feudal law. Is that correct?
Not feudal.
Well, I'm sorry, the Spanish law. Is that correct?
No, I think the genesis of land rights in the Philippines was something called the Spanish Mortgage Act,
Okay.
right? And then that eventually became the Presidential Decree 1529 or the Land Registration Decree, right? Which is still in effect today. So yeah,
That's why it's so foreign to Phil Ams, is to be like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? How does that work? Because it's not, it's not our legal tradition of, the English law. It is now the Spanish law. So that's why it's a little hard for folks to grasp on the American level.
and if it wasn't even that, if you needed it to be more complex, I believe the Torrens system, which is what we currently implement, is Australian. So
Yeah.
where did that come from?
Yeah.
We're the Philippines. We welcome everybody.
That's right.
We'll take
very inclusive.
Yeah, we're very inclusive. We'll take your laws. We'll tweak it a little bit, adjust it to what works here in the Philippines.
Now, is there any land reform? Is there anything like, because I think that's a problem. From as long as I've been alive, that's always been a problem. Is there any kind of committee or review as to this process that you know of? I know it's going to put you on the spot there. I don't.
No worries. I mean, I wouldn't be a lawyer if I wasn't at least a know-it-all to a certain extent. So land reform as a concept in the Philippines exists. It comes out of the social justice bent of our Constitution, where we really want to give land to the landless. And so land reform as a general concept in the Philippines, which is implemented largely by something called the Department of Agrarian Reform, or the DAR, redistributes larger tracts of land, right? And the social justice bent of this comes from the fact that there are many people who have agricultural lots in the Philippines who possess them, but do so under tenancy agreements, whereby they remit either a percentage or a portion of the harvest to the landowner. And you'd have generations of people living and working on this land, but not having the right to own it.
Yeah.
And so there's been sort of disharmonies, let's call it, as a consequence of the land reform programs in the Philippines. Many farmers who actually are given these agricultural lots as a consequence of the operation of the systems of agrarian reform would like to sell them, right? Because that's the easiest way they see out of their particular economic
Situation.
So that's to answer your question directly of whether or not there's agrarian reform in the Philippines. Yes, there is.
And that's being implemented as we speak, or is that in the future, or what would it?
So now,
status?
actually, I wish my law partner was here because he knows the law a little bit better than I do. Kenneth Varona, if ever you're in Cebu and you need a legal consult, feel free to reach out to him.
That's the man?
He's the man. He's the man. So currently, there are no further areas which will be declared as subject of agrarian reform.
Yeah. So basically, if I understand it, then that is the government taking that land and then redistributing it to other folks that are in that vicinity.
Yes.
So it's a very...
Not the vicinity, who are actually in possession.
The possession, yeah.
And that's its own can of worms. Let's not get into it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very, again, I'm not using the right word, but it's very communistic to the point where it's like, you're taking someone's land and just distributing the wealth to someone else, so it's interesting. I mean, again, it's.
But in America, they have sort of a tradition of redistribution of wealth, also, don't they?
Yeah, there's an intimate domain, before public use and that kind of thing, and then they have to get just compensation to the landowner and that kind of thing. But I think what I understand from your situation is that there is that social justice bent that says, we want to give land to the landless, regardless if they want it or not, right? And that's where I'm a little confused as to how that is, the law of the land.
Well, so I mean, I could just easily put a question to you, and I will, as a precursor. In the U.S., there's sort of this push towards a wealth tax, isn't there?
A wealth tax.
Yeah, where sort of I think one of the factors of production in the Philippines previously were the ownership of land, right? And so now
it's quite the opposite. I think under the most recent tax plan that I saw, there's actually there's a reduction in tax for the wealthy. So yeah, I mean, again, it hasn't been passed yet. From I understand in this new administration, but the top 1% I think is actually enjoying a wealth or a tax cut as opposed to the middle and the lower class.
Would it be fair to ask why that is the case?
That is the new administration's position. I don't understand why. Myself. But
I'm very curious to know about that, actually. Yeah, especially since now with President Trump, he's acting a lot of executive orders. I mean, you see Elon Musk in the news with DOJ.
Well, the idea, I think, is that it's the trickle down analysis, which we've talked about before. In government, where if the wealthy is maintaining their wealth, then the blessings of their wealth will trickle down to everyone else. Historically, that's never happened. They just become more wealthy, and then the gap between the have and have-nots are bigger. So I don't know exactly why we're going to that. I mean, that's something outside of our court system. That is the administration, the executive branch, and that's their policy. So now when it comes to the DOJ system, I mean, is there a particular question you had there? I mean, it's interesting because that's really just for government efficiency. So it's in the guise of good governance. Whether or not it's effective or not, we just don't know. Believe it or not, we're only in month one of the Trump administration, so we don't know what's going on. It's been a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of those executive orders are just that, executive orders. They're not the force and effect a lot of times with the Constitution or the laws that have been implemented.
So I'm seeing a lot of pushback, obviously, from the legal system because of DOJ. But how is that, like right now? How in what you've seen, how is that working out in the United States?
There's a lot of lawsuits.
Yeah.
Obviously, it goes through. I mean, like for instance, the birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
His executive order banning birthright citizenship in certain circumstances isn't before the court. And the judges, the lifetime appointed judges, well, at least one has indicated that is completely wrong, and has put a halt to a lot of that. Now the immigration issue, which again is a whole nother hour that we could talk about, if not a whole other week that we could talk about, is really the discretion a lot of times with the administrative arm of our system, because they're the enforcers of the law.
Yeah.
So, it's again, we're not even finished the fourth week of his administration, and there's a lot of stuff going on.
Can I ask him a question?
Please.
Yeah. So one of the things that I always look to is the system, the separation between the federal and the states in the U.S. So I monitor that dynamic just out of professional interest, because it's something that we frankly do not have in the Philippines.
Because there's no states here, right?
There's no states here.
Yeah, right.
So the president is the president of the entire Philippines.
And you have governors of provinces, essentially.
But their competence is restricted, right?
Yeah.
They have to follow the laws of the National Congress.
Right.
So, to what extent is Trump impinging upon the rights of states?
That's a great question. In the U.S. Constitution, there's the 10th Amendment that says that if it's not specifically outlined in the federal powers, it's reserved to the states, right? So that is another legal question before the court as to what powers are solely within the states and what powers are governed by the federal government. Now, what's happened recently with our the abortion issue, for instance, that's gone back to the states, and there's now going to be a hodgepodge or a variety of different laws implemented in different states. So we're going back, in my opinion, again, this is all in my opinion, not in my official capacity, but in my personal capacity, but we're going back to a confederacy of different states and different laws applicable to each state.
So with the 10th Amendment, I'm curious to know, is there something like that here in the Philippines?
Well, there's no states.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't apply.
So what powers then do these governors have?
So I have this sort of legal concept that I like to bandy about with friends. It's purely my own invention.
Yeah.
And please, any local government official, please understand, who is listening to this, please understand I say it with as much humor as I do judgment. I like to say that the local government units of the Philippines are the playgrounds of democracy, right? Because actually, the ordinance power of the provinces and any local government units in the Philippines is very limited. It is within the scope of the laws that are passed nationally by Congress. And so you cannot pass a law which governs, say, for example, personal relations or penalizes criminal conduct, which is contrary or in excess of the laws that are passed by the National Congress. We've only recently had a particular political subdivision in the Philippines which has this sort of power to enact its own laws in the Bangsamoro region, which is a region of the country which exercised its right to self-determination.
That's in the south, right?
In the south, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is your Basulta region and the area around Cotabato. And that is the only part of the country where it can be reasonably argued they have the ability to pass their own laws. Everywhere else only has the ordinance power.
Why is that?
Because they have their own parliament, right? So
Even though they're part of the Philippines.
I could talk about that for
Does the tax do the tax laws apply in that region as well?
Yes.
So how do they get those taxes?
So they have an internal revenue allotment. So again, please, if anyone who's listening and I butcher the sort of terms that are used, please understand that I'm not exactly an expert on this. I read a book once, so I understand the general structure. They do receive remittances from the national government and this is largely as a consequence of the negotiations that occurred between the Bangsamoro region and the national government. And there's a very deep history of independence seeking and actual outright military conflict that led to the creation of this. And I do not want to do it the disservice of talking about it with any real detail in this podcast.
Look, I want to ask you another question, though.
Ask it and I'll tell you if I can answer.
Yeah.
The question is, what if their parliament says that we do not adhere to the taxes that's been levied upon us and we refuse to pay them? Then what would happen?
Well, the Bangsamoro region is I will say right now they are slated to have their first election. Very first election in a few months. And there are moves to delay that election for security reasons. So you will excuse me, Judge Bryan, if I refuse to answer that question at this particular moment in time because there are too many things in play currently.
So granted.
Yeah. I speaking about taxes, I want to ask a question then about taxes because I being Filipino American and coming back to the Philippines and my hometown of Cebu, right? I talk to a lot of business people where they always say that when they pay their taxes, they always feel like sometimes nothing really goes to their city, right? In terms of allocation of resources, it's always in they call Imperial Manila, right?
That's not a Filipino thing.
No, that's not. that happens in the United States as well, right?
Yeah, all the pork barrel stuff and everything else.
Yeah.
But that happens. But that's really a function of your representative then. They need to go there and just fight. Because really what I understand is this is for the good of the nation.
Yeah.
Right? So those taxes should go for the good of the nation. And whether or not it's allocated correctly is the Congress and the Senate. Well, actually, in the U.S. is the Congress. Congress holds the purse strings.
Yeah.
So it's a congressional delegation that should bear a lot of the complaints.
Do you feel like that is accurate here in the Philippines?
I feel like I'm super on the spot, but I promise I come on this podcast and I answer all the questions as they're put. Cebu is a special case because actually the amount of revenue collected from Cebu is larger than the amount of revenue collected from than it receives by way of remittance. Mm-hmm. So Cebu is a particular case. So that's on one level. So just on pure economic analysis, the amount of revenue collected, yes. Yeah. It is true. I don't think anyone in any of the congressional budget parts. Do you need to take that? and I should say at some point we should sort of pause because I need a pee break.
Sure.
Yeah, but just to answer the question, the other level to this analysis is that Cebu does not have it is a metro, right? Just like the National Capital Region is a metro.
Yeah.
But we do not have the equivalent of the Metro Manila Development Authority, right? Which is
MMDA.
a decision-making body which allows for the reasoned approach to the development of the province as a whole, right? And so if we don't have some kind of equivalent where you're allowed to say, hey, in Cebu we should have a skyway here we should have a train, here we should have ports for the movement of people,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And it's purely left up to the local government units. I struggle to imagine that you'll have the political consensus to enact any kind of measures. So we need that superstructure. And that's something that I hope one of our representatives from Cebu hears on this podcast and then files a bill in Congress for the purpose.
Yeah, that happens also in the states. I mean, like California is what's called a donor state. So they produce more taxes than they actually take in from the federal government.
Yeah.
And like other states, like some of the southern states, like I think Kentucky is one, and they are a receiver state, and they are one of those folks. Again, in our federal systems, that they actually take in more than they give out.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always going to be that inequity in their minds as to who gets what. So it happens, especially again, what Attorney Rami said about the laboratories of democracy. In
Playgrounds.
Playground. Is that
Playgrounds?
Playgrounds
yeah,
of democracy.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think in the United States, I think one of the Supreme Court decisions called the states laboratories of human experience or something like that, where we actually test the laws in the smaller states and then use it as a microcosm of the nation, right? So in that situation, it's just a part of our democracy. Some are stronger than others. And then, for the good of the nation, then we all pull in together to form a nation. So that's where the taxes go.
Yeah.
Now, there's always going to be someone's like, well, I didn't get as much as that guy did.
Yeah.
And that's going to be always a problem.
Yeah.
So there is no corruption, really, right? I mean, that's just all. It's not called fake news. That is.
No. I think it's a question of incentives. I think one of the things, another thing
that is such a lawyer thing to say. It's a question of incentives. I have an incentive to take your money.
No. So what I will say though is another thing I'd like to say, aside from playgrounds of democracy, is that the structures that exist in the Philippines are simultaneously too big and too small, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say playgrounds of democracy, I really do mean that the local government units in the Philippines are they don't have a lot of legal competence, mm-hmm. and that they don't have very broad areas of discretion in which they are allowed to flex themselves. So say, for example, if Cebu doesn't like the social security system, and wants to give more to its people by virtue of the amount it collects in revenue, it cannot do that. As against, because it simply does not have the legal competence to implement such a system.
They don't have the manpower.
Not even the manpower, just the mandate. They don't have the ability, because there is a national
for Social Security.
Yeah, there is a national law that exists
that prescribes what to do.
Yeah.
And who owns it.
And who's in charge, etc. So very arguably, in fact, an ordinance to the effect that Cebu could have its own social security system would be unconstitutional, because that's something that's already legislated upon by the National Congress.
Can they have a smaller one? It's not Social Security. Maybe it's like Social Security Light.
Yeah.
It'd be a separate tax. A contribution to another wealth fund.
I guess theoretically you could. There are like social protection programs that exist in individual.
Or even just like a local tax, like a ad valorem type of situation.
Yeah. I think there would be, but like some kind of overarching system that supplements Social Security. I think it would run afoul of the constitutional prohibitions. And
well, don't even call it that. Just call it something else. Call it like the Cebu citizen improvement fund or whatever.
This is properly the discussion that's subject of like a 50-100-page legal
least.
opinion.
Yeah, right.
We need another bottle of Don Papa. Yeah,
We'll fix it
and some
right
palookas.
now.
Yeah.
But
Can you imagine we're doing this at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon? If this was like at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, man, at the club, this would be fantastic.
Having these type of conversations.
I'm playing badminton after this.
There you go.
Good luck. All right.
Hockey,
What's that?
badminton.
I don't play badminton. No, that's just Rami.
Rami, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I know I don't look particularly athletic.
I thought it was hockey.
I'm more a golfer. Golf and scuba diving are like the only two things I do. And golf.
And hip hop dance.
Yeah. And when I mean golf, I mean golf. Just kidding.
God, that's Tito in training right there.
I got
Tito
those,
in training.
I got
right
those
there.
Tito jokes. We're rolling, right? Okay. We're gonna go back in 3, 2, 1. All right. So I want to switch things over to one of my favorite topics, and even I've learned this term called hugot, right? Something that pulls at your heart, which is like corruption and political influence, right? You see in the United States a lot of some weaponizing of the political system, right? Where the like, for example, in the past we've had U.S. President Trump and his supporters claim that the Department of Justice is being used to politically keep him out of office. And then currently in the Philippines, you're even seeing Sara Duterte face an impeachment complaint, right? I'll start with you, Rami. In the Philippines, like, do you see the courts being used as political weapons here for the presidents or those in power?
There's probably more delicate ways to put this, but I think it's sort of an expectation to a certain extent that our constitutional structures are the battlefield upon which political campaigns are waged. And so whenever something which exists at the level of ideas transgresses a particular norm, we're going to butt up against a particular constitutional structure. You have a particular example in the impeachment of Sara Duterte, right? Which, unfortunately, because it is pending before the Senate, we're still waiting to see what the Senate acts on or does with that particular complaint. I can't comment on it because in the Philippines we abide by something called the sub judice rule, but I can speak about the larger trend about how constitutional structures have been reflected in our politics. And one of the things that I thought about when you asked the question is that we've started to develop this political norm in the Philippines where the vice president, who actually up until Sara Duterte becomes a kind of political punching bag.
Yeah.
So if you think back as far back as President Noynoy, he had a vice president by the name of Binay, and in the last 2 years of Binay's term, he was turned into a political punching bag essentially, right? He began the campaign for president. He did run for president as the favorite to win, and because of a sustained campaign of essentially political demolition, he was, by the end of the campaign, he had a approval rating of about 1%, or at least a preference rating. I can't recall the particular dynamic there. We had Duterte with his vice president, Leni Robredo, and it was sort of a way of winning political points to punch down. The president would punch at the vice president who was not on his ticket with him. Yep. And now we have an example where even a joint ticket, right, which was BBM and Sara, they are now punching, the president is now punching down. So it's a strange political norm which comes as a consequence of the constitutional structure, which is that in the Philippines, the president and vice president can be from different political affiliations. Yeah. And frankly, I don't, you asked a question about corruption. It became a discussion more about like the political structure. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure that is entirely healthy or good for the system. I would prefer it be another way.
Yeah. Well, I'll disagree with the premise of the question as to weaponizing of the DOJ in the United States or the FBI. Those are just basically allegations that were given or that were advanced by the current president, who alleged that he's being kept out of office which he has not. In fact, he is in office at this point in time. Now, arguably, is he weaponizing the DOJ and the FBI? Well, that's something to be determined. We don't have the same sub judice rule that we have. The First Amendment still applies. So, in this situation, it's questionable whether or not he is weaponizing the DOJ and the FBI, especially since one of his campaign statements was that he was going to lock up his political opposition. So that's also somewhat problematic. But in general, the way that the institution of the FBI and the DOJ was created is an apolitical, or those are apolitical institutions. Regardless of the presidency, they're there for the pursuit of justice.
Yeah, correct.
And if there is a situation where there is it comes too close to the political thicket, then there is a power to do an independent counsel where that they would take them out of the situation, the DOJ out of the system, and then it would be run independently in terms of the investigation. And the findings of facts will come, or the investigations will come from that independent investigation. So again, the weaponizing of the DOJ and the FBI seems to be, again, an attack on the institutions of those for a political motive that was really employed in the last administration. There's been no evidence of that. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because the DOJ had to go through those safeguards, meaning that they had to have a grand jury finding. There has to be warrants. There has to be those types of due process safeguards that would allow them to move forward. And all of those were met throughout the investigation in that federal case. And I guess you're looking at the classified documents case.
Yeah.
And all of those were met. There was an independent counsel that was appointed as well. Now, whether or not it got to the light of day because of the court, well, there might be some political situations that have been applied in that situation. But in terms of, weaponizing the DOJ, again, that's just been a true allegation. There's been no evidence of such that I've seen.
Yeah. Does the Philippines have these type of safeguards, or the Philippine Department of Justice have these type of safeguards?
Well, I think. Well, you're asking me to comment on Secretary Remulla's portfolio. The Secretary of Justice is ultimately he holds the justice portfolio of the current administration. I have a hard time connecting, of course, to the impeachment complaints, which was the context in which the question was put. Yeah. Because that's properly the domain of Congress. Although the DOJ is involved, I believe they're conducting an investigation. I think it would be improper for me to comment as to the specifics of Sara Duterte's impeachment complaint and the ancillary complaints that might be related thereto. But generally speaking, my experience with the prosecutorial arm of government has been one of independence and professionalism. If you bring a case before a prosecutor in the Philippines, they will take your case seriously, they will give it the due diligence, and they will decide it on the merits of the case. There have been some reforms in the Philippines actually recently to do away with frivolous cases being filed. There is now a regulation on the books that requires a case to have a reasonable, there's a specific term, I hope I'm approximating it at least, is a reasonable chance at securing a conviction. Before you can actually bring a case to court and successfully have an information filed. And this is because usually only a cursory examination, probable cause, which is a lower standard of evidence, was used before the filing of an information, which would lead to situations where sometimes frivolous cases would get into court. And so, generally speaking, the Department of Justice has actually exercised prudence, and you can see it even to, not as to the substance of the matters brought against Sara Duterte, but they're exercising a lot of caution. They're actually marshaling evidence. They're taking their time to exercise their discretion, if I might say.
Yeah, a lot of that's not even in the courts. I mean, the impeachment it originates in Congress, and then it's run through the Senate, so it's not really a court issue. It is run through, another body of government. Is that correct?
Yes, but at least insofar as the news is today, and by the time that someone is listening to this, it may be different. There were certain complaints concerning sedition, which are properly not subject of impeachment complaints. They're separate. But a question I would like to actually put to Brian is, because the context of the question was one of corruption. Do you see and I wanted to ask Brian this, do you see the influence that Trump is wielding insofar as the DOJ is concerned currently, or perhaps the structures of government more broadly, as corruption? Or
Well, it's problematic, because really, it's inherent in the system, because the DOJ, the FBI report to Trump.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. It's all part of the executive branch. Again, historically, it's been apolitical, so even when there was a Democratic president during let's say Barack Obama's time, the FBI who was really reporting to Obama had a report against Hillary Clinton, right? So if
James Comey, the whole
exactly right. Mm-hmm. So you had that situation. So because that shows that it is completely an apolitical entity. And that would never, I suspect, would never happen under the current administration. That in this situation, the current situation, is that what it appears to be, and what folks have argued, that the new the new FBI directors and the secretary would be more loyal to the president and his findings and his motivations than the pursuit of justice. So it's tough to say that, I know, but again, that's what seems to be the appearance. Hopefully that's not true. I hope it stays apolitical. I hope it is just going to the pursuit of justice. But again, if you look at Trump 1, the first administration, there was an attorney general that he had. I think his name was Jeff Sessions, that refused to do a few things, and the president was very furious with that. Again, you shouldn't be able to comment on that because it should be apolitical. So, but it's problematic. We don't know. Again, we're in month 1 of this new administration, so we'll see. But that is the perception at this point, and I hope it's incorrect.
Yeah, just to add, that's one of the strengths, I think, of the American political system. Just to highlight the differences between the two.
Yeah.
When we're talking about this, we're commenting exclusively on the federal system.
Yeah.
Which I think is a wonderful, that you can have that sort of bimodal discussion. This is a dispute that is occurring at the level of the federal system and remains at that level. So the competencies of the individual state governments are largely unaffected. So this is as in contrast to the Philippines, where the structures of governance are really unitary. The president of the Philippines is the president of the Philippines, right? The Congress of the Philippines is the Congress of the Philippines. The Supreme Court of the Philippines is the Supreme Court of the Philippines. There is no separation between local and national. We're all one unit, and so that's where I think the U.S. system is particularly strong in its diversity and its diversification. Just to highlight that distinction, perhaps. Yeah,
but it still affects everyone in the United States. Yeah. It's not just a federal issue, because the president is our president as well. So hopefully that again, and the institutions again have always been the beacon of the world. We've always prided ourselves to be the leaders of democracy and the beacon, the shining beacon of light on the hill. So in this situation, we want to make sure that our institutions are protected and that they remain apolitical, and that we adhere to the pursuit of justice.
Yeah. One of the issues I hear here about the Philippines is, in the U.S. we have strict laws about lobbying and campaign financing, but here in the Philippines, I've seen that money...
In the U.S.?
In the U.S.,
yeah.
Right? But in the Philippines, from what I've heard, I've even seen personally, right? There's these fixers, under-the-table deals, money playing a big role in these judicial decisions, even vote buying always being a thing here, right? The question I'm trying to propose is really, is it, what extent is it, how is it possible that there are checks and balances in the Philippine judicial system?
Maybe I think the question is broader.
Yeah.
But before I answer the question, I'd sort of reject the premise. So you mentioned judicial decisions. I think it was clear in my answer a while ago. 99.99999% of the time, judicial decisions are, the duly judged decisions. And as an officer of the court, I'm duty bound to sort of push back against any characterization that corruption features prominently in the judicial system. But I think what you're trying to ask me is, to what extent does corruption play as a feature of governance? If I can sort of synthesize the question. And I think this goes back to
because I personally just see it very ingrained in the culture of the Philippines versus the United States, where there is, people say there is corruption, but it's more of, behind closed doors, whereas here in the Philippines it's very normalized.
It's out in the open?
It's very out in the open. Something as simple as...
Is U.S. just better at hiding it? Is that what you're
maybe
trying
the
to
U.S.
say,
is better at hiding it, right? Whereas it's just so ingrained in the culture, you get stopped by a cop for a traffic violation. Oh, okay, here you go, right?
I have a crisp $100 bill in my wallet.
Sometimes even less, like 500 pesos. So I've heard.
So let me answer the question on certain levels, right? Let's leave aside the political dimension, right? So like these large actors, these political fixtures in the constitutional system, it is their nature to take swipes at each other, and some of that is going to be dirty, some of it's going to be altruistic. Let's put that to the side. Let's talk about the kind of corruption that you can experience every day. Personally, ever since becoming a lawyer, I have had much less experience, just because I think people are wary around lawyers and legally learned people that you can't get this corruption past this person, right? Now, if you are, say for example, in business and you file reports with this or that authority, I won't name which particular office, and something is off, there is some degree of non-compliance on your part, and someone offers to you an easier option to remediate whatever non-compliance you might have had, I think 99 times out of 100, the person who is given that offer is going to accept.
Of course.
Right? It is in the nature of business to sort of find the path of least expense.
Yeah.
Right?
And the path of least resistance, really.
Right. And so I think in that way, when we have corruption, we have a populace, at least insofar as those that intersect with regulatory authorities, who may be more receptive, right, to these kinds of easy solutions, these easy ways out. We have also a government administrative class who is shackled by oversight, right? So if, say, for example, a regional office of a particular national government entity messes up, the only interaction they'll have with their head office is the receipt of a show cause order, right? And that show cause order, that's their jobs on the line.
Sorry, what is a receipt of show cause order?
So like, say, for example, the regional office of a particular government instrumentality that administers some kind of regulation as it relates to some social legislation, tax, customs authority, licensing, whatever, right? I'm being intentionally ambiguous for very deliberate reasons.
Of course.
Right? They will audit those files in the central offices, and they will see, hey, these auditors here, they may have played it a little bit too fast and loose, and that can come from a place of, we don't have enough resources to administer the mandate that we're given, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough people. It could be accommodation, right, which is frowned upon. You're supposed to transact with everyone equally. It could also be any of a number of reasons for why that is the case. And so now these people will receive show cause orders and made accountable to alleged misfeasance, right? That is a feature of the system, partly because of this unitary government that we have, right? Because bureaucrats in Cebu, bureaucrats in Mindanao, bureaucrats in the areas surrounding the National Capital Region are accountable to high-level managerial and executive-level positions in the capital region, and who can only administer and discipline these employees through these show cause orders, very indelicate instruments. And so in that area, in the margin of appreciation that exists for compliance with these regulations, there is ample ground for discretion, looking for easier ways out, because again, these people just want to have a 9 to 5, do their job, and not necessarily put themselves at the risk of like a Sandigan Bayan case or etc. A lot of the times, whenever I sit down with government officials who administer these kinds of regulations to which corrupt practices may be imputed, they're very reasonable people. They're saying, hey, look here, this is what happened. You're missing this piece of paper, and now my boss is breathing down my neck, right? And I really, really need this to go away soon because honestly, I could lose my job, right? And so that's been largely my experience. There are some times where it's very blatant, where people have asked for money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it from the stories I've heard and certain experiences, I've seen it.
Are you saying like they've asked for money from the clerk's office to process the paperwork? Is that, or in that office that's facilitating the document? That's where you would ask for. That's where folks may ask for some money or a contribution of some sort.
Yeah, and usually it's directly to the clients who come to me for advice, right? It's very seldom the lawyer himself sees them as feasance, because whenever a lawyer's around, everyone's sort of on guard and nobody's willing to drop their. But my clients will tell me,
the worst.
This person came to me and said, if I can fix this, or if I can do this for them, then the issue goes away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And in that situation, my job as a lawyer is, of course, to advise my client as to the law,
Yeah.
advise them as to the liability if they push through with this particular course of action. But that's the special extra dimension that you have as a Filipino lawyer, understanding that there may be extra legal considerations, right? Sort of the way that compliance with the law is actually undertaken in the Philippines, and helping my client navigate those. That's sort of my job, to give them that additional perspective, because anyone can Google the law and understand that corruption is illegal.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a part of the resolution process sometimes. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to know how it, for the Filipino audiences as well, how it is in the United States
With
when it comes to corruption.
corruption, yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, can you buy justice?
Yeah.
Right? And the answer would be no. From an officer of the court as well. And I appreciate your answer, Rami. But again, it goes back to our initial question: is there a two-tiered system? But can you buy a judgment? Can you buy, those types of orders? The answer should be no. Right. The way you would have a better advantage is if you have a better lawyer. Can you afford a lawyer and get a better result? That's the situation where there's a disparity as to resources and the type of justice you get. So, obviously, bribery is prosecuted in the United States. But I think what we're seeing also, again, goes back to my original comment, was not only does it have to be right, but it has to look right.
Yeah.
And in the most recent situations, in the last year or so, we noticed that some of our Supreme Court justices, at least one in particular, had a very close friend, a billionaire close friend, that went on vacations, used the yachts and that kind of thing. Does that have the perception of corruption? Is it improper? And again, the court of public opinion.
The optics of it.
It seems like it would be,
Yeah.
right? Especially if there's a case in front of the Supreme Court, and you are very chummy with one of the litigants. It seems like it's not a fair playing field.
Yeah. It seems like a big conflict of interest.
Right, exactly right. And unfortunately too, there's if the Supreme Court says it's not, then Supreme Court is final, right? So they are ruled by themselves, and that is an issue. Now, does it happen in the lower courts? I suspect it probably does, But as what Rami says as well in the Philippines and the United States, I think 99% of the orders and the awards that come down are based on the merits of the case and are adjudicated accordingly.
Yeah.
So I still have faith in the judicial system. I think that's one of our institutions that remain hopefully apolitical, and that we handle every case on a case-by-case basis on the facts that's presented to the court, and we act accordingly. So now, again, is there corruption? I'm sure there is. Especially when you have almost 400 million people in the United States. So there might be some of the human tendencies. I've never heard of a clerk asking for payment to process a filing of some sort. I don't think that is as common. Even in the larger courthouses around the United States. But again,
No, we don't have that. Like, to be perfectly clear, like that, like clerks and judges, they don't charge to file cases beyond the filing fees. So
Okay.
just to push back on that
Right.
one aspect.
well, I thought I understood that some folks were asking for monetary compensation to move the case forward. But is that not?
No.
understood?
And I was referring purely to like sort of the administrative level, right?
Administrative
Like
level, okay.
The compliance with like the bodies of law, which I listed previously.
That's regulating that particular industry.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay. Well, so I haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
I've never seen that in real life. Again, it may happen. I just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, even in the United States, we've seen former presidents and CEOs get prosecuted. But
Representatives, senators,
and representatives
as well.
mayors, judges. I mean, whereas here in the Philippines, even if politicians are charged with corruption, they often seem to still be able to stay in power. And why does accountability seem stronger in one country or the other?
Well, I think one of the things that people like to say is like, no. These political leaders are people just like you and me, right? That's one of the knee-jerk statements that people say, like we should be able to hold them accountable. We should be able, but no, actually, when we vote these people into office, we sort of give them rights and privileges beyond that which is enjoyed by the ordinary person, and we have to acknowledge at a certain extent, and I think this is something the Philippines could do a bit better with institutionalizing, embedding in its own culture, that yes, actually the people who we choose to lead us matter, right? The box I tick. So if you've actually seen a ballot in the Philippines, there are like at least 100 circles you could shade.
Yeah, I mean, you have in the U.S. you have Democrat, Republican, Independent, right? But here in the
two-party
Philippines,
system.
the two-party system.
Yeah.
But oh my God, in the Philippines, there's so many
many
damn
candidates are
parties.
there?
It looks like an SAT exam. just to put it mildly. There's a lot of potential circles that you can shade, right?
And if you shade improperly, does it
it invalidates you.
if that's the whole ballot? Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if it's contained to specific ones, if you turn it into like a coloring book, then it invalidates the
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we as Filipinos can do a little bit better job of inculcating in ourselves is that who we choose matters, and these people are going to have rights and privileges beyond that of the ordinary citizen because of the offices we put them in, right?
Yeah,
And-
but that's just truly that's truly democratic, though.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody can run, and then the cream of the crop rises. Like in the U.S., you've got to get nominated from this party and then that party, then your choices are only two.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a purely democratic system, I think the Philippines has that purely democratic. At least that ballot looks like to me that is, you're not, prohibited from running. But based on what you said, though, yes, but you have to take a little more consideration as to who you put in power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that said, like there are 800 local government officials who are running unopposed.
800.
Yeah. So that means that essentially their winning is a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the same thing in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. not the same metric, but their approval ratings of Congress are in the low 30s, maybe 20s, and yet they still run, and become, senators and representatives. A lot of times they're unopposed as well because if I had a job that was, a regular job, and I had I only got, my boss's, 30% approval rating, I would probably be fired,
Yeah.
So, but that's not the situation in these types of races, unfortunately. So, like what you said, elections do matter.
Yeah. In the Philippines, though, I think, and I do a disservice if I didn't speak about it. There is a way that politics is conducted in the Philippines, which is, frankly, could do a little bit better. Vote buying is an issue,
Yeah.
right? Utang ng loob is an issue.
Can you explain utang ng loob a little bit more?
Utang ng loob is this sort of very natural human tendency the Filipinos have that if you receive something from someone, you are in a way indebted to that person. So that's for the American listeners. And so the relative position that politicians in the Philippines who use that principle to sort of run against their opponents or to obtain these political positions, they use that by saying, hey, I did all these things for you. And so, as a consequence, you should vote me into office.
You scratch my back, or I scratch your back, you scratch my back, essentially. But it's like much deeper than that in a way.
Yeah,
I don't think it's even that meaningful. I think it's a human tendency. If you get something, you're going to give something back. I think that's what good people do.
Yeah.
I think that's why in the United States you get, free labels with your addresses on it from certain organizations because you feel like, they gave me all these free labels, I should donate to their organization. I think that's just a natural tendency. Now, in the Philippines, I understand is that they take it to the next level.
Oh, they do. I mean, I've on an example is I'll every time I come back to the Philippines and it's just like this school gymnasium donated by this mayor, right? It's just like a show of, hey, but these are actually government funds. I mean, it's not really these people in power who like.
But I think the argument is I fought for you to get these government funds because it could have gone to
Somewhere
another
else.
area. So I think I would imagine that's a campaign tactic. I think is that correct?
Unfortunately, I think not. Just because the internal revenue allotments that each LGU gets are fixed by law. Depending on certain performance metrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, am I pushing the table? But so these are funds that would be going to the LGU regardless, right? At least insofar as a mayor's competence is concerned. So
So it would have been allocated to that gymnasium regardless of who.
Well, he chooses to make the gymnasium just as easily as he can choose to create like a kitchen to feed the homeless, just as easily as he chooses to make to improve the facilities of a school, But those resources are available for mayors to tap. These are the discretionary component of the internal revenue allotment.
Yeah, but then that also adds to the utang na loob. Yeah, right? I mean, because I allotted this to your gym, you owe me.
Yeah. Right. So a really good example of this would be I think a way to really refine the example is flood mitigation measures, right? So say for example, the infrastructure that concerns the reduction of the effect of floods in the Philippines is not often visible to voters, right? So a voter cannot see, for example, if the aqueducts and drains and the water infrastructure has made it easier for floods to be more easily mitigated in a particular local government unit. Local executives may elect instead to build a bridge, to build a road or some other infrastructure which is easily apparent to the electorate because it can be perceived by the electorate.
Sounds like a marketing issue.
Yes. So just to highlight perhaps some of the intricacies to that particular issue.
That happens also to the United States. I mean, like in the United States, they passed this big infrastructure bill in the United States, and many folks voted against that infrastructure bill, but yet it still passed. But the folks that voted against the infrastructure bill that got money regardless will go out there and say, "Look what I got for you," and then you would still have that same issue. Again, it's a marketing issue, right? And then kind of play on that, the utang na loob, like, "Look what I'm doing for you. Keep me in office," right? So,
I guess I just wish Filipinos. Yeah, I am Filipino. I need to make that very clear. I do not look Filipino. I think we could do more to sort of hold our leaders accountable, and we don't, right? Like one of the things that I like to play with is just to have a political experiment, like have a sort of campaign where people goes, you know what, vote for the other guy. Just like have one election cycle where like it becomes a popular notion to just vote the other way and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right? Like whoever's been in power for 30 years, just vote the other way. Or if there's only one candidate, abstain. See what happens. See what's different. Right? Just to sort of give people that sort of visceral understanding. Hey, you know what? Actually, I could choose differently, couldn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think that's an education problem?
I think many people in the Philippines don't even have a choice.
Yeah.
You know, like it's too entrenched. Like, so say for example, the choice that is often presented is of one political dynasty as against another political dynasty.
It's these families, right? These
And then they have a particular way.
Yeah.
Again, it's a question of incentives. What is the system? Why does it make it so that only these kinds of political actors are successful?
Is the entry, the bar to enter the race, is it very steep in the
Yes.
Philippines? Yeah, I think that's why.
I guess you have to come from money to be able to even run for office, or you have to have some sort of financial backing here in the Philippines versus
That's the same in the United States. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
to
a lot of
extent.
money in politics.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of times when you are a first-year congressman,
Yeah.
you spend a lot of time fundraising.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing. Also, too, in the judges. The judges in the United States, in certain levels, are elected judges.
Yeah.
So there's a level of campaigning, and to get the word out, there's still a lot of money in that.
Yeah.
As well. So it takes money to get elected into office. But what I understand from the Philippine side, it's even a steeper.
Yeah, because I mean, I see this a little bit in the United States, but not as much in the Philippines, where there are these political dynasties where, these areas, cities, barangays are the grandfather is the mayor, the governor, and then they put their son in office, and then because of, let's say, term limits, and then they come back into power, right? Or they'll run for vice mayor, or they'll run for mayor, and then when their term limits are up, the son will run for mayor, and their run for vice mayor, but they are still pulling the strings.
Wait, no, but this is something I need to push back on a little
Please.
bit. Like, just in the same way that Brian acknowledges there are some similarities between the Philippines and the U.S., I'll acknowledge that there's a similarity here. Like, you can say the Philippines is one that's sort of subject to political dynasties. We actually have term limits, right?
So do we, but it's only in certain offices as well.
But not your national Congress, right?
Not in the Congress nor the Senate.
Yeah.
Our president does have term limits.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
You do have political dynasties. I mean, just
The
name
Bushes, for instance.
Bushes, the Kennedys,
of course.
the Clintons. I mean, there is something about that psychological imprint that having been from a great family, someone who has existed at that political level and was able to marshal resources of the federal or local government for the purposes of furthering the public good or whatever was popularly conceived of as the public good at the particular time in which those measures were being granted,
Yeah.
that there is a transference that occurs, right? People understand that you may approximate, if not approach entirely neatly, the greatness of your predecessors.
Yeah.
Right? And I would say that there is more similarity. The Philippines is not notable in that regard.
Yeah. And also, too, from a campaign perspective as well. It's the name you know.
Yeah.
Also, too, so it's very
Yeah,
easy.
that name recognition.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So.
Well, so then, do you think leaders in either countries, right, should kind of have some sort of immunity, then, or be protected?
Talk about criminal immunity or civil immunity. What kind of immunity?
Criminal immunity. Yeah.
In my opinion, no person is above the law. Now, obviously, in the United States, there are some doctrines as to sovereign immunity, qualified immunity, things of that nature. So, you want to make sure that folks that are honestly performing their duties are free to make those decisions and be immune from from some sort of criminal immunity if they just in their judgment make the wrong judgment, right? Now, if they do it outside of that, if they're doing it for political reasons, if they're doing it for personal reasons, then that would be subject to criminal liability and prosecution. So the short answer is no. I don't think they should be they should be liable. I'm sorry, they should be immune from criminal liability if they are in fact doing things outside of their scope of office. Now the problem, that's exactly what happened with the Trump case. The Trump case most recently, in terms of, I think it was the I can't remember which case it was. There seems to be so many Trump cases, but where the state, where the Supreme Court said, listen, if he's doing stuff or performing in the capacity of the president, as opposed to what he was doing in his personal capacity, then what he was doing in his capacity as president should be immune. And then what they did is they kicked it back to the lower courts to figure out which is personal, which is presidential, right? Yeah. So in that situation, again, it preserves the notion that no person is above the law. So yes, there should be some sort of immunity for honest type of administration of their office, but if they're doing it personally, then I think they should be held to the same standard as an ordinary citizen.
Rami,
I think
thoughts?
The immunity is very, again, coming from the context of the ballot is the principal way by which we elect our leaders, and other accountability mechanisms are secondary but nonetheless still important. I would say that we do have checks and balances insofar as the existence of impeachment, et cetera, are concerned. This is me speaking purely about the Philippine experience. The Philippine, a lot rides, because of the nature of our structure of government as a unitary government, a lot rides on the office of the president now, or the other political offices which may be subject to varying levels of immunity. Because there is only one executive, there is only one Congress, there is only one judiciary. And so the ability of those bodies to function independently of interference of the courts and only subject to the constitutional safeguards that exist is much more critical in the Philippines. Because paralyzing our constitutional structures, they're the only game in town, right?
But would you say that to lower level officials as well?
Well, so say for example, in the Philippines,
like for instance, if I'm a traffic court judge, do I have a license to speed and run red lights and do all sorts of different things that are criminal in nature, but be immune because I am a judge?
No. I think, and many people have gotten in trouble for that. We've had people as high as governors or mayors being suspended. We have a constitutional structure called the ombudsman, which can actually met out its own penalties, which is structurally independent. Yeah. So I'm not saying, but I'm saying at the highest levels, there's a good reason why we have these immunities, whether it be presidential or parliamentary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I am saying, though, that if, say, for example, a president is outside the country negotiating for investment to come into the country, and the people he's negotiating with know, for example, that he is facing domestic litigation and that he's not immune from the same, that can seriously hamper his mandate and his ability to affect his purpose, which is entirely independent from any alleged misfeasance he might be doing. Because
while he's in office.
Yes. Right. Of course, I think it's very well established. I think you would agree with me. When you're out of that office, it's fair game. We see that today playing out in our current political milieu. But there is a reason why these protections are sacrosanct.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's that sovereign immunity. So in the administration of that duty for the good of the nation, there should be some sort of immunity. Now, the question there is, is it qualified limited type of immunity, or is it absolute immunity? That's where it's a little tricky, right? Because now you're talking about an elected official versus a king,
yeah,
right, or a queen.
Yeah. But a king doesn't have to stand up to an impeachment court. You know what I mean?
Exactly right. Yeah. That's the point, right? Yeah.
That's the fine line. So, if there was, let's say, one thing you could fix that could change everything, or if there's one thing that you could introduce, just one major reform to the Philippine or U.S. judicial system, what would it be? Let me start with Judge Ramos.
Term limits.
Term limits.
Term limits, yeah. I think, again, the Article 3 judges, I understand that the reason for that is so that you remain impartial and independent. In the situation when that was drafted, the lifespan was 30 to 45 years old. I don't think the drafters intended a 96-year-old in that office. I mean, it's unheard of. If I were to pass any kind of reform, I think 18 years, which is up to the age of majority, it's a whole generation, is enough to be in government. So that would be with regards to any judge, the Senate. So that'd be 3 terms in Senate, 9 terms in Congress. I think those term limits would ensure that there's a fresh perspective for the future of the country, and it would, eliminate a lot of these entrenched government officials that are beholden to other special interests.
Rami?
I think insofar as the structural changes, I'll start with some non-controversial ones and then
Please.
go with the controversial ones. The first is a joint ticket. The president should run with the vice president. He should know who's gunning for him politically. And
They should be on the same ticket?
they should be because currently you can be from different tickets.
Of course.
Right? I would like to incentivize that cooperation between the president and the vice president just for the stability of leaders in the Philippines. I think the party list system is something that seriously needs reform, if not outright removal. I understand that there are some party lists that more adequately represent sectoral interests than others, but unfortunately, I think the vast majority of these are from the existing political class, and it's just been another vehicle for them to project their influence. The other thing, and I think we had a governor from Cebu, where you're from,
Yeah.
who got pilloried in the early '80s or something, because he made the mistake of saying, "Oh no, the Philippine Constitution is a prelude to federalism." And so, it became an exam question in the bar exam saying, "Is the Philippine Constitution a prelude to federalism?" And the correct answer would be no, because the Philippine Constitution is viewed as complete, not transitionary, not as a development to other things. I think revisiting that is important. I think that there are some political subdivisions that do deserve a right to exist and can function capably, right? And I think that we should give that power to the people who govern themselves.
Just like a lawyer, he asked for one, and you had at least 4.
It's all good. It's all good. I think we have
I don't have my gavel with me, but I would have hit it, after the first one.
Shut up.
No, well, we've got probably a good 5 minutes left. But if there's any other topic you wanted to really talk about or bring light to,
I think you covered a lot of stuff.
yeah, we've actually been talking for almost about 3 hours now.
Yeah.
It went by way quick.
Is there anything else on your mind that you would like us to address?
I can bill you for the time.
Yeah, exactly right.
Right?
As you should.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've learned a lot from this discussion, and especially things that I did not know about. I think for me, my hope is being a Filipino American, having grown up in the Philippines for the first 16 years of my life, and then moving to the United States, and the other half of the years of my life growing up there, I've always been coming back with the hopes of how do we just improve the Philippines, right? What keeps me coming back is really, at the end of the day, it's the people, right? Filipinos are the most generous, kind-hearted people, sometimes to a fault.
That's the original utang na loob,
Yeah, right.
right? That's exactly right. That's why you come back.
Yeah, so it's why we come back, and every year, almost consistently, I come back here wanting to give, to help out the country, and I end up getting burned by the corruption or just the system in itself, right? Where it's so hard to do business. It's so hard to want to just give back and help when it's like the the corporations and the systems and the people in power thrive on the inefficiencies of this country. So,
Let me ask you.
Yeah.
What do you think the roots of that problem is?
for me, to be honest, it's the corruption. It's the system.
Well, why is it so
itself.
corrupt? Let's go a little deeper than that. Why is it corrupt?
I think it's just so systemically ingrained in
Why?
the culture. In the culture.
I'm going to sound like a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Why is it so systemically ingrained?
I wish I knew the answer
Yeah.
to that.
Rami, do you have a question? Do you have an answer for that?
I think there was a former senator, Miriam Defensor Santiago. I'll quote her so I don't get into trouble.
Yeah, that's the one who got jailed by Duterte, right?
No.
No, that's Laila De Lima.
Oh, sorry.
I'm name checking far too many people.
You got
Yeah. Sorry.
She said that when political leaders run for office, they have to borrow money,
Yeah.
and when they're in office, they have to pay back all the money they've stolen. They borrow such an intense amount of money.
that they've stolen, that they've been given, or invested in.
Invested in,
Yeah.
I guess.
There's a political class, and we'll get into how that works. Let's just say, for example, favors are extended. That's the reason why they have the resources to marshal these campaigns. We don't have a lobby system. We don't have a culture where you can actually solicit from the public.
Yeah.
A formal one, anyway.
A formal lobbying system, yeah.
Right? And so Senator Miriam would say that once you're in office, you have to pay back all those favors you received. Right?
Well, that's not, only for the Philippines. That also happens in the United States.
Yes, but there are mechanisms whereby there's a sort of infrastructure, there's a legal system which permits that to take place. In the Philippines, it happens with public funds. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference maker.
But why? That's a question.
I think, say for example, imagine this: if you're a local chief executive who runs an LGU,
A local government unit.
local
Yeah.
government unit, which is 1,000 kilometers away from the presidential palace, from the Secretary of the Department of Justice, and the office of the Ombudsman. Those are realistically the only checks on your power. They're all 1,000 kilometers away. Why would they pay you any mind?
Yeah.
Right? I think this is what I mean when I say the structure of Philippine governance is simultaneously too big and too small at the same time. LGUs cannot reconceive their mandates to actually implement any meaningful change in the lives of the people because their mandates are very limited. Our government institutions are so high off the ground, they're incapable of perceiving the state of the nation with any degree of specificity to have targeted interventions. I think we have to begin the discussion about creating a middle, right? It could be states like the U.S. has. It could be some other intermediate step, something slightly above an LGU, like an autonomous region like we're beginning to have in the Bangsamoro. But we have to have those intelligent discussions as to what meaningful change in the Philippines
From a
is.
governmental structural standpoint.
Yes. Yeah, we've had the same constitution so it was in 1986, the Freedom Constitution. We ratified the 1987 Constitution. So we're coming on 40 years of the same constitution. We're 2 years shy of that, right? We haven't had a single amendment. We haven't had a single constitutional commission. We haven't had a single constitutional assembly to then take that long, hard look at the structure of our governance. Yeah. And I think we need to be having those conversations.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, I think it's poverty. I think there's a bigger divide between the have and have-nots. And I think if you get closer to the middle, I think you would have a lot less corruption. And I think that's a danger in the United States as well. I think our divide in wealth between the have and have-nots in the United States is getting wider. I think we're going to have a problem when you have no middle class at all. And then the folks that are running the government will be more susceptible to taking the bribes and the other alternative methods to processing because they need the money. So I'm looking at, I love your idea, but I think it's just from a basic standpoint, I think poverty is the issue that we need to combat first and then move on from there. So
from poverty to just education.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to build your middle class.
Yeah.
You need to go middle out, as opposed to right now we're doing top down.
Yeah.
You need to build up. Right?
Yeah.
But I do have a question for Attorney Rami from a Infala standpoint. You talked about the national movement towards alternative dispute resolution, which is very popular in the United States. Is there any way that we, as the National Filipino American Lawyers Association, can assist in the furtherance of promoting ADR or arbitrations and things of that nature? Now, obviously, we're not, barred in the Philippines, but is there any situation? So we've been doing it for a little bit longer. Is there some sort of synergy that we can, offer, from Filipino American lawyers to Filipino lawyers that can help in that backlog or at least train in ADR?
Well, so actually the civil code in the Philippines actually only requires arbitrators to be able to read and write.
We could do that. Yeah. And some
Seriously?
can sing and dance too.
Wait, really? The civil code in the Philippines only requires arbitrators to read and write.
Yeah. Because arbitrators, they can be from any discipline, right? You can have a construction dispute by an engineer. You can have a financial dispute by an accountant. Arbitration is not restricted in that sense. So I would think the NFALA could reach out to the dispute resolution centers in the Philippines. So I think in the Philippines we have two currently: the PDRCI and please forgive me. There's another one. I can't recall the name
Another
right now.
organization that would be helpful for that.
Yeah, and then there's the Philippine Institute of Arbitrators, which I am currently a member of. Just having these fellowships, exchanges, candid feedback as to how arbitration can work and how it can take up. If the Filipino American Lawyers Association could come to the Philippines and explain how this particular arbitration practice was not actually such a big thing in this particular locality, and explain how it picked up. We started with this industry. We made them start instituting arbitration clauses in all their contracts, and then we were able to unburden the court docket by this much.
How hard would it be to have the buy-in from the integrated bar of the Philippines to do that? You think it's a tough sell, or and also too from the local court system, because we need, again, the enforcement mechanism needs to be in place. How hard or easy would that be?
Well, the integrated bar, they love these kinds of things, right? If there's another avenue whereby they can strengthen the court system by unburdening the dockets, they love that, right? Yeah. Because it's part and parcel of the advocacy of the integrated bars, support the bench, right?
Because that's exactly what Lockie was talking about. We want to come back, we want to give back, and since we have this type of training, and that we could read and write, that we might be able to help in a particular way that most folks couldn't. Again, we always talk about in the United States, we have we're really products of the medical profession, nurses and doctors and all, and they come back with their medical missions, right? As the president of the National Filipino American Lawyers Association, we're looking to do some sort of legal mission that would help whatever issues that are there that are pending within the Philippines. However, we're not arrogant enough to know that we have all the solutions. We want to know what the problems are and see if we could help. And if we can help, we want to help. But again, our hesitation is that we're not the saviors. And we don't think that we're here on the white horse to save you from whatever it is. But we do want to help if that's what you guys want us to do.
Well, speaking very hesitantly, I think any support, because, like, say, for example, the largest commercial interests, the ones that have the greatest potential for sort of changing, improving the state of the Philippines, is through these large commercial transactions which bring in foreign capital, right? If, say, for example, arbitration clauses could be instituted as sort of the common practice or standard for investments into the Philippines vis-a-vis their joint venture partners or their enterprise partners or their technical partners.
Because in the United States, we have the American Arbitration Association.
The
AAA. Exactly, the AAA.
I think I've drawn up a few contracts with AAA as the arbitration clause.
Exactly right. So we'd love to be able to help with that if possible. But again, maybe it's with my philosophy is we don't want to force a solution if that's not force a solution if that's not a need, right? But if that is truly a need, then I'll be more than happy to bring that to the membership and see if we can work out something. I just want to make sure that is, something that we can do that would be wanted. Again, there's so many things that I find, and I've done this myself, where I said, here, here's a bunch of stuff that I think that you need, and people don't need it. We don't want to be that arrogant to be like, we know the answers.
So there's two bodies. So there's the Office of Alternative Dispute Resolution, which is properly a government office, and the Philippine Institute for Arbitrators, which I'm currently part of as a junior officer. And I think any support, any exchange of information, any exchange of ideas that could occur between those various focal points, including Infala, would be very welcome. And I'd love to support you to sort of bring any relevant experience that could come to the Philippines.
Rami, I know you've only been practicing for about, is that 6 years?
6-7 years, yeah.
Yeah, man, you're doing a great job. I'm proud to see you doing all this stuff. I really enjoyed being here with you today.
Yeah. Well, Judge Ramos, Attorney Rami, thank you so much for being on this podcast. We'd like to thank, again, T, Swan, and obviously John Dang for having on this podcast and letting me host this. One of my biggest dreams is to really just come back here and try to see how we can just level up the Philippines and just really impact the lives of everyday Filipinos.
Yeah.
So,
thank you, Lockie. We do appreciate the invitation.
Awesome.
And thank you.